He couldn't run, he couldn't even stand. But when the woman who had stood by him through war, pain, and silent nights was struck down in front of him, he rose anyway. With one knee, one voice, and six calm words that changed everything. This is not just a story about injustice. It's a story about love that refuses to break, about the quiet strength of a man who lost a leg, but never his dignity, and a woman who found her voice when no one else would speak. They didn't come to fight, they just came for help, and they left behind a legacy. Stay with us. This is the kind of story that doesn't shout to be heard. It whispers and echoes forever. The guard's finger hovered just above the trigger. Back off now. Emily's hand slowly rose into the air. Her voice trembled. Please, we're just trying to get help. But mercy didn't come. The harsh crackle of the taser split the silence, and in that one cruel second, everything collapsed. David, a Marine veteran missing his left leg, crumpled onto the hard ER pavement. His wife Emily collapsed beside him, convulsing, her body betraying her while her eyes searched blindly for him. He couldn't lift her. He couldn't shield her. He couldn't run, but he could still speak. And when he did, his voice was calm, sharp, steady, unflinching. I'm sorry, sir, but you just made a mistake. Those 6 words didn't shout. They didn't threaten, but they carried weight, like a quiet detonation that echoed through every ear within range. In the next hours, the hospital would go silent. A formal investigation would be launched. And across the country, people would be reminded again what true strength actually looks like. David Mallister never liked to complain. Even as a child growing up in a small Ohio town, he believed that pain was something you carried, not something you shared. Life had taught him that early. His father walked out without warning when David was 12. Just gone. No note, no goodbye. That day, David became the man of the house. Rachel was 6. Danny was only 4. There wasn't time to cry. He learned to cook grilled cheese and boxed macaroni. He packed lunch boxes with peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Later, he took odd jobs, raking leaves, stocking shelves, doing whatever it took to keep the lights on. His mother, exhausted and fierce, worked double shifts as a diner waitress, despite the arthritis that swelled in both her knees. But it was David who held that little family together like glue under pressure. When he turned 19, the Marines weren't just a career, they were his way out and their way forward, a shot at something better. He enlisted without fanfare, and by 24 was leading a squad in Afghanistan. He was sharp, composed, and had that quiet confidence that made others follow him without question. But 3 weeks before he was scheduled to fly home during his 3rd tour, everything changed. A roadside IED tore into their convoy. The explosion ripped through steel and sand, and through him. He lost consciousness in a swirl of fire, blood, and silence. When he opened his eyes 2 days later in a dusty field hospital, his left leg was gone. So was the man he thought he was. The surgeries came in waves. 14 months of hospitals and rehab. But nothing prepared him for phantom pain. Pain in a part of his body that no longer existed. It was torture without a wound to touch. Some nights it burned, other nights it twisted like knives. And in the darkness, all he could do was breathe and try not to scream. But even then, even at his lowest, there was one person who never walked away. Emily. Back then, she was Emily Vargas, a kindergarten teacher with bright eyes and a laugh that lit up a room. They met at a 4th of July barbecue just 2 weeks before he left for his final deployment. She wasn't interested in the uniform or the title. What caught her eye was the way he knelt beside a little boy who had scraped his knee, talking to him in that gentle, patient voice. He waited until the child stopped crying before he cleaned the wound. That quiet strength, that's what pulled her in. While he was deployed, they wrote letters, not emails, not texts, actual letters, ink on paper, like something out of another time. When he returned home, battered and missing a leg, she didn't hesitate. At the airport, she ran straight into his arms, crying, clutching the man he still was. She never saw the missing part, only what was left, and all that still remained. 3 days later, he proposed. Right there on the floor of baggage claim, on one knee, his only knee. They married the following spring. From that day on, Emily was more than his wife. She was his caretaker, his compass, his calm. She drove him to appointments. She learned about prosthetics and medications better than some nurses. She moved them close to a VA hospital. She adjusted her entire world to fit his broken one. When depression took over, when his pain turned the inside of his head into a heavy, silent place, she stayed. She sat with him on the cold bathroom floor when he couldn't find the will to stand. She read his journals when he could no longer form the words himself. And somehow, even through all of it, she still got up each morning and taught her class of 5-year-olds, smiling like nothing was wrong. The children never knew that their cheerful teacher spent her nights bandaging a stump where her husband's leg used to be. Now, 10 years have passed. 10 years of choosing each other over and over again, through pain, through silence, through days that felt too heavy to carry. David may have lost his leg, but in Emily he found something more vital, a reason to stand. And it began, like many tragedies do, not with violence, but with fear. Pain wasn't new to David Mallister. It was just another unwelcome guest in a life already crowded with aches he had long grown used to. Phantom pain, sharp, cruel, unreasonably real in a place that no longer existed, had haunted him for years. He'd endured it quietly, behind clenched jaws and sleepless nights. But this time was different. This time the pain didn't just visit, it stayed. It raged. By the third night, he hadn't managed more than 2 broken hours of sleep. What started as a dull, nagging throb had become a firestorm, wild, merciless, and invisible, ripping through the space where his leg once had been. That morning, Emily had begged him, pleaded really, to go to the hospital. He'd brushed her off like he always did. "It'll pass," he muttered through gritted teeth, his hands fumbling with the butter knife as he tried to spread it on a piece of toast. He didn't make it to the end of that slice. Halfway through, his body gave out. His crutches skidded across the linoleum as he crumpled to the kitchen floor, the toast and plate shattering beside him. That was the breaking point. Emily didn't argue. She didn't ask. She just moved, quietly, swiftly. Her hands trembled as she helped him up, not from inexperience but from fear. She'd done this before, too many times. But tonight felt worse. He was too pale, his pain too raw, his silence too heavy. She slid him gently into their old Honda Civic, pushing the seat all the way back. Normally it was to make room for his prosthetic, but tonight he wasn't wearing it. Couldn't. The pain made even a sock unbearable. He gritted his teeth, but she saw it. The tears threatening, the breath hitching, the way his fingers clawed at the armrest. The Lincoln County Medical Center was 15 miles away, the only ER open late on a Saturday night. Emily drove in silence. Her hands gripped the wheel, her eyes fixed on the road. But every red light felt like a cruel joke. Every second stretched out like it was daring her to scream. When she finally glanced over, David's face was soaked in sweat. His knuckles had turned white from gripping the door handle. He didn't speak. He couldn't. The groans were there, somewhere in his throat, but he forced them down. As they pulled into the hospital lot, the main entrance seemed impossibly far. Cars were packed into every space. The emergency room was, as always, overflowing. Emily circled once, then again. No open spots. That's when she saw the loading zone, marked clearly for emergency drop-off only. Not for parking, not for waiting. But tonight, rules didn't matter. David did. She threw the car in park, rushed around to the passenger side, and grabbed his crutches. David tried to wave her off, always the same line. "I've got it." But he didn't. He couldn't. His jaw was locked from the pain. His shoulders drooped with exhaustion. He looked like he might fold in on himself right there in the seat. Emily steadied him, slipping an arm around his waist. His face had gone ashen, and even the smallest motion seemed to light up every nerve in his body. He bit his lips so hard he tasted blood. "Just get to the door," she whispered. "I'll move the car after. I promise." David gave a weak nod and let her guide him. Every step with the crutches felt like climbing a mountain barefoot. His pride wanted to say no. His body had already given up. Neither of them noticed the security guard at first, standing just outside the ER doors, arms folded, eyes sharp and watching. They were too focused on the now, on pain, survival, and dignity barely holding together by threads. Officer Jean Creighton noticed them, though. He always noticed. Bitterness clung to him like a second skin. There was a time when the people had respected him, when a salute meant something. But that time was gone, and he never stopped resenting it. He'd served 8 years, 2 tours in Iraq. He never missed a chance to bring it up. But the Army didn't let him leave on his terms. A busted back and an incident with a superior officer had put an ugly mark on his record and ended the only career he'd ever believed in. Since then, it had been nothing but disappointment. Parking enforcement, mall security, night shifts in warehouses where no one even looked him in the eye. This job, guarding the ER at Lincoln County Medical Center, was the last place where the badge still felt like it mattered. He wore a black windbreaker with security stamped across the chest in bold white letters, his belly pressing against the belt that held his radio and taser. He wasn't military anymore. He wasn't police, but he still needed to be seen. And tonight he saw a chance. His eyes narrowed the second Emily pulled into the loading zone. He watched as she rushed to the other side of the car. Watched as she pulled a man out, clearly injured, barely standing. But Creighton didn't see pain. He saw protocol being broken, and protocol was the one thing he still had left. Emily guided David out of the passenger seat, carefully steadying him as he struggled on his crutches. Every step he took was labored, pain written across his face, but they moved forward together. Just 5 paces in, they were stopped. Creighton was already marching toward them, clipboard in hand, his expression stern and voice booming like a drill sergeant. Enforcing rules was all he had left. His purpose, his pride, his control. "Ma'am," he barked, "this zone is for active drop-off only. Do you have a hospital-issued permit, or are you just ignoring the sign?" Emily turned quickly, startled by his tone. "I'm helping my husband get in. He's in pain, and—" "That's not an answer," Creighton cut in, scribbling notes on his clipboard. "You can't leave your vehicle here without clearance. Move it, now." David, breath short from the short distance, raised a trembling hand, trying to keep his voice steady. "Sir, I'm a Marine Corps veteran. We're here for emergency care. I just need a moment to—" "Oh, you need a moment?" Creighton scoffed, stepping in closer, his eyes narrowed. "Buddy, I've seen your type. Everyone thinks they deserve a medal and a parking spot just because they served. Newsflash, we all did our time. That doesn't make you special." Emily's eyes widened with anger. "He lost his leg overseas," she said firmly. "He's in severe pain. We're not asking for special treatment. We're asking for basic human decency." "Basic decency?" Creighton snapped, voice rising with disbelief. "You think ignoring signs and parking wherever you want is decent? You're not above the law. Nobody is." David gripped his crutch tighter. He had no desire to argue. He never did. But the way Creighton looked at Emily, as if her worry was an inconvenience, and the way he treated David's missing leg like it was a badge of laziness, it ignited something deep inside him. "I'm not asking for special treatment," David said, his voice low and even. "I'm asking you to be human." "Then act like one," Creighton fired back, jabbing his pen toward David's prosthetic. "You're not dying, you're just lazy. Move the car or I'll have it towed." The words hit harder than David expected, not because they were true, but because of how carelessly they were said, as if the pain he lived with every single day could be brushed aside like it did not matter. Like he didn't matter. Emily's hands trembled at her sides, her jaw clenched, her voice tight with disbelief. "I'll move the car after he's checked in," she said through her teeth. "Not before." Creighton squared his shoulders. "Then we have a problem." He didn't see a wounded veteran or a devoted wife helping her husband. All he saw was a challenge to his authority, and Creighton had built a life on making people regret doing that. For 10 years, Emily had been the quiet strength behind David. Through surgeries, through paperwork, battles with the VA, through long nights when pain kept them both awake. She had never once raised her voice in anger, but something about this man's smug disregard for her husband's suffering, his humanity, shattered that calm. She stepped between them. Her body was still, but her presence was immovable. Her voice, low and firm. "I'm asking you, please step back. My husband needs emergency care. We're not trying to cause trouble." Creighton crossed his arms, a crooked smirk forming on his lips. "Lady, if he needs help, the ER is right there. Go check in. Move the car like everybody else. You're not special." Emily drew a slow breath, trying to hold back the fury burning inside her. You keep saying that, like it's wrong to need help, like we're wrong for asking. My husband served 3 tours. He lost his leg. Over there. Creighton waved a hand, dismissive. Yeah, well, lots of guys lose things. Doesn't give him the right to break the rules. You can't park wherever you want just because your husband has a sob story and a limp. Behind her, David shifted uncomfortably, the shame as visible on his face as the pain. He hated moments like this, hated being the reason for this kind of attention. But he knew Emily wasn't going to back down. Not this time. She took another step forward, her voice louder now, sharper. He's not a sob story. He's a human being who's had to fight for everything, his life, his dignity, his right to stand here. And I am not moving that car until he's inside and registered. Creighton's hand dropped subtly to his belt, his fingers brushing the holster of his taser. Ma'am, he warned, you're becoming agitated. That's disorderly conduct. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. People nearby had started to slow down, watching the scene unfold. A couple walking toward the entrance stopped mid-step. A nurse by the front doors tilted her head, frowning as she looked in their direction. But Emily didn't flinch, not anymore. Her fear had burned away, replaced by something more powerful, conviction. And this time she wasn't backing down. ER came to a halt right at the curb. A teenager in a hoodie lifted his phone and hit record. Just inside the hospital's automatic sliding doors, 2 nurses in scrubs slowed their steps, eyes trained on what was unfolding outside. Emily glanced around and noticed the shift in the atmosphere. Something had changed. People were watching. Phones were out. The weight in the air had thickened, heavy with tension. Creighton's voice cut through that tension like a blade, more aggressive now. You have 10 seconds to move your vehicle, or I'll radio for a tow and cite both of you for obstruction. David raised his hands, trying to de-escalate. Officer, please. I don't want this to turn into something more. My wife's only trying to help. We're willing to cooperate. Just give us a moment. But Creighton turned to him with a sneer. Then control your wife, or I will. That was it. Emily's voice cracked like a whip. Excuse me? David instinctively reached for her arm. Emily. But she stepped forward, planting herself firmly in front of the guard, their faces inches apart. Don't you ever speak to him like that. Don't you dare try to intimidate a man who gave up his leg for this country. You've got a taser, and he's standing here with nothing but dignity. Who do you think history is going to remember? Creighton's expression turned cold, his jaw locking tight. Enough. More phones were out now. The crowd wasn't large, but it was enough. Enough to make this moment matter. One nurse whispered into her walkie-talkie. A woman in a floral blouse leaned toward her husband, pointing, murmuring. A soft murmur of voices began to ripple through the parking lot like a slow-building wave. Sensing the tide turning, Creighton didn't back down. Instead, he dug in deeper. Last warning, back away, you're out of line. Emily didn't budge. No, we're just done being pushed around. The air was thick now, thick like concrete, unmoving. David's jaw clenched. His crutches felt impossibly heavy. He wanted to stop this before it spiraled, but some instinct deep inside told him it was already too late. The fuse had been lit. Emily's hand moved, just the slightest twitch at her seat. Not in defiance, not in threat, just a reflex. It was all Creighton needed. David saw it unfold in slow motion. The flash of yellow, the taser raised, aimed center mass, no hesitation, no warning, just a sharp pop of electricity. And then the world split in two. The electrodes struck Emily in the chest. Her body jolted violently, back arching like a puppet yanked by invisible strings. Her eyes went wide with shock, then rolled back. A sound tore from her throat, a twisted mix of a gasp and a scream. Her knees buckled. She crumpled to the pavement, hard. Her sundress twisted around her legs, her hands dragging against the concrete as her muscles spasmed, jerking uncontrollably. The sound of the taser discharge bounced off the brick hospital walls, loud and final. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman screamed. Someone dropped their phone with a clatter. But David didn't hear any of it. Not the chaos, not Creighton yelling something about non-compliance, not the nurse calling backup into her walkie. All David could hear was a sound that didn't come from the outside world. It roared from within his skull, louder than anything around him. A ringing, a pressure, a storm rising from the past. Afghanistan, the sun, the dust, the boiling heat, the checkpoint, the boy on the moped who didn't brake soon enough, the rifle raised too quickly, the shot, the Kate, the screaming, a father wailing beside a crumpled body, his unit scrambling to respond, but everything too late. The line had been crossed. He remembered the helplessness, that hollow ache in his gut, the understanding that once certain things happen, they can't be undone. And now he was back there again. Except this time, it wasn't a stranger lying on the ground. It was Emily, his Emily, the woman who held him through sleepless nights, who learned how to dress his wounds when he couldn't bear to look, who read medical reports and learned their language for him, the woman who brought him back when bitterness threatened to consume him, who packed his lunch before every VA appointment, who set reminders on her own phone so he wouldn't miss his medication. Now she lay on the pavement, her body trembling, her eyes filled with shock and pain. And David couldn't reach her. His crutches had fallen. His legs screamed with phantom pain, burning as if the limb were still there. But he shoved the agony down, shoved it deep, and tried to move, tried to get to her. David pushed himself forward anyway, dragging his body across the hot asphalt with sheer will. One knee scraping, one hand planted to steady himself, the other arm reaching desperately. "Emily," he gasped, breath ragged. "Emily, I'm here." Above them, Officer Creighton loomed, legs spread in a rigid stance like he still had control. His taser remained drawn, his expression unreadable, eyes sweeping across the gathering crowd as though daring someone to interfere. "She didn't comply," he declared loudly, the words almost mechanical, rehearsed like a line from a report he hadn't yet written. "She got aggressive. I had to subdue her." But no one was buying it anymore. The crowd wasn't just watching, they were recording. A wall of phones now captured every second, some held by hands trembling with fury, others streaked with tears. A nurse ran toward Emily, her badge swinging wildly as she dropped to her knees beside her. Another hospital staff member was already calling into a radio, their voice tight with urgency. David finally reached Emily's side. Her body had stopped convulsing, but her breath came in rapid bursts, her fingers twitching uncontrollably. Her eyes were wide, brimming not just with physical pain, but raw humiliation, disbelief, fear. He could feel it radiating off her, pulsing like a wound torn wide open. And in David, something shifted. The fear hadn't vanished. The pain was still alive in every fiber of him, but something else had taken root. Something fiercer, stronger. Purpose. This time he wouldn't stand by and let it happen. Not again. He lowered himself beside Emily, gently covering her hand with his. The contact steadied him. His breath began to level out. Around them the noise swelled, nurses barking into radios, bystanders whispering in outrage, the continuous hum of phones capturing the moment. But David was no longer overwhelmed. He moved deliberately without panic, not with fury, but with focus. He shifted his weight and rose slowly, bracing himself on his prosthetic leg. The burn in his hip was sharp, the ache behind his eyes nearly blinding, but he didn't waver. His body screamed for rest, but his resolve burned hotter. Officer Creighton was still standing rigid, taser gripped tightly in both hands, scanning the scene like he wasn't sure whether the crowd feared him or pitied him. David's voice sliced through the noise, low, calm, unshakably steady. "I'm sorry, sir," he said, "but you just made a mistake." Creighton flinched, just barely, but enough to show he hadn't expected that. It wasn't the words that caught him off guard. It was the way David said them. No yelling, no threat, just quiet certainty, the kind that couldn't be ignored. David took a step forward, each movement deliberate despite the pain. "You used a weapon," he continued, "on an unarmed civilian in a hospital loading zone, while she was helping a disabled veteran access emergency care." His voice was measured, like he was reading from an official transcript. The weight of truth anchored each word. Creighton tried to cut in, his lips parting, but David raised a hand, just a little, and it was enough to silence him without ever needing to shout. "You just violated federal law," David said, his eyes locked on Creighton. The VA Caregiver Support Act protects spouses providing aid to veterans. You interfered with medical access under duress. That alone is grounds for a Department of Justice investigation. The officer's posture faltered, his gaze darting around. The confidence was draining from his face. He saw the phones, the crowd, the nurse still kneeling beside Emily, and now a man in a suit approaching from the ER doors, clearly an administrator. Two more uniformed officers were entering the parking lot from the far end, radios crackling faintly. But David wasn't done. You escalated a nonviolent situation. You ignored identification. My VA card is in your pocket, which I gave you. You dismissed a medical emergency. You used force without warning. You didn't call for backup. You didn't attempt de-escalation. And you discharged a taser in front of multiple witnesses and hospital security cameras. Creighton's mouth moved, but no words came. The nurses nearby had gone still. Some had their arms folded tightly. Others gripped clipboards against their chests like armor. None of them looked surprised anymore, just deeply, visibly shaken. The two newly arrived officers stepped forward cautiously. One of them spoke. "Everything okay here?" David turned, calm and unwavering. "This officer just assaulted my wife with a taser in the middle of a medical emergency. You'll want to speak with the ER nurse, check the surveillance footage, and talk to the 20 or so people who saw what happened. And I'd like to file a formal statement immediately." Before they could respond, the man in the suit reached them, adjusting his tie as he stepped in. "I'm Mark Feldman," he said, "Director of Hospital Operations. I saw what happened." David's voice remained firm, unwavering even under pressure. "Then start by getting her medical care." His command cut through the air like a scalpel, precise, undeniable. Mark didn't hesitate. He turned and gestured sharply. "Wheelchair, now." Two orderlies sprang into action, returning in seconds with a gurney. They knelt beside Emily with gentle urgency, carefully lifting her trembling frame from the pavement. Her body was still visibly shaking, the shock not yet subsided, but her eyes said something different now. They glistened with unshed tears, not just from pain, but pride. As the gurney wheeled toward the hospital's emergency room entrance, Emily turned her head and looked back. Her glassy gaze found David's, steady, unmoved, still standing tall where the confrontation had first unfolded. David's eyes then shifted, locking on Officer Creighton. The man who had sparked it all now stared anywhere but back. Shame burned behind his rigid posture, but he didn't dare meet David's gaze. "You picked the wrong day to power trip, sir," David said evenly, his voice calm but resonant with moral clarity. "And the wrong people." Then he turned and followed the gurney, his slow, steady pace a statement in itself. No bravado, no retaliation, just dignity. The crowd watched in silence. What they'd witnessed wasn't a scene of chaos or defiance. It was something else entirely. A reckoning. Quiet, righteous, and long overdue. By dawn, the story had already outgrown Lincoln County. A teenager standing unnoticed on the outskirts of the parking lot had captured the entire incident on their phone. 3 minutes of raw truth that spread like wildfire. The footage showed it all. The heated confrontation, the electric crackle of a taser, Emily's collapse, and David's unwavering presence in the aftermath. The video reached 20,000 shares in hours and then surged into the hundreds of thousands. Local news outlets picked it up by midday. By nightfall, national broadcasters were running headlines like, "Veteran stands tall without rising to violence." But the headlines came after the consequences had already begun. That same night, Officer Creighton was suspended from duty, pending an official investigation. Mark Feldman, the hospital administrator, acted decisively. Before sunrise, a staff-wide email had gone out. "We cannot and will not tolerate aggression toward patients or those who care for them, especially during moments of medical distress." What happened last night was a failure of care and of accountability. The investigation was swift. The video left no room for ambiguity. Witness statements, over a dozen from nurses, EMTs, and even bystanders, painted a consistent picture. Creighton's written report didn't match what was recorded. Within 5 days, he was officially dismissed. But firing one man wouldn't be enough to heal the breach. Not for David, not for Emily, not for the community. Soon after, the hospital invited David and Emily to a closed-door meeting with the board. Not to apologize, to listen. David sat at the far end of the long, polished table. His leg rested on a padded stool, still recovering from a surge of phantom pain. Emily sat close beside him, her arm wrapped gently through his, supportive, steady. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. David's voice carried the weight of both their experiences. "I don't want your apology," he said simply. His voice was level but carried undeniable authority. "I want the next veteran who shows up here in the middle of the night in pain to be treated like a human being. I want the next caregiver who dares to raise her voice for someone she loves, not to end up lying on the pavement." There was no rebuttal, just the quiet hum of truth landing, heavy and inescapable. Within 2 weeks, Lincoln County Medical Center had rolled out mandatory de-escalation training for all hospital security personnel. Receptionists and nurses on duty were included. New protocols were implemented specifically for veterans and caregivers. Priority triage for service-related conditions, updated signage for emergency parking areas, and a redesigned intake procedure. But the most significant change came in the form of a new internal code of conduct, one built with input from VA mental health counselors, former military medics, and caregivers like Emily. It was dubbed the Veteran Respect and Response Policy. It prioritized trauma-informed care, required proper verification of VA documents, and clearly defined the only circumstances in which force could be used near patients or caregivers in distress. Unofficially, they gave the code a name, borrowed from David's words that night, a 6-word benchmark now echoed in break rooms, staff meetings, and security briefings alike. "Sir, you just made a mistake." It wasn't a threat, it wasn't even loud, but it carried weight. It had become a mirror, a test for every decision made in the heat of a moment. Officer Creighton lost his badge. But what mattered more wasn't what he lost, it was what the community gained. A hospital that had once been cold and indifferent had begun to change. Not because of headlines, but because of one quiet moment where someone chose principle over pride. Rigid protocol now bore the imprint of a soul, not due to lawsuits or mounting societal pressure, but because a single man, fractured yet unwavering, chose to stand his ground. He didn't shout, he didn't lash out, and yet, in that silence, something fundamental shifted, something real. In the days that followed, David began sleeping through the night for the first time in weeks. The phantom pain still came, curling through his missing limb like smoke. But it was different now, less like a wildfire, more like a distant ember. It wasn't just the updated medication or the newly scheduled consult with a specialist from the VA. It was deeper than that, something no prescription could explain. For the first time since that violent explosion in Afghanistan, David no longer felt like a shell of the man he once was, no longer just a burden others had to carry, no longer a forgotten veteran limping on the fringes of society. He felt, quietly, powerfully, seen, not for his wounds, but for the voice he still had, for the purpose that hadn't died overseas but had only gone quiet, waiting. That moment in the parking lot, 6 words spoken not in anger but in unshakable calm, had lit a spark inside him he believed war had extinguished. Not the Marine in uniform, not the rank or the command, but the calling to protect. This time not in combat zones but on familiar ground. Not with a weapon, but with truth. Emily changed too. She'd been David's silent backbone for years. Behind every appointment, every piece of paperwork, every battle with insurance reps and unresponsive clinics, she was there, holding him through the worst of the pain spikes, researching long into the night when no one else would explain what came next. She had always believed her job was to keep things from falling apart, to keep herself small and quiet so David could stay whole. But that night, when she raised her voice, not in chaos but in fierce love, something inside her cracked and reformed. She didn't regret it, not for a moment, not the trembling confrontation, not the way she stood, chin up, against a man twice her size. If anything, she felt proud, not from rage but from clarity. For once, she had stepped into the light, refusing to confuse silence with respect. She had drawn a line, clear, firm, and in doing so, she redefined her role. No longer just the caregiver behind the curtain, but the protector beside him. A partner in every sense. The video spread faster than they could have imagined, and the world's reaction came swiftly and unevenly. Some commenters were cold, dismissive. He should have just followed the rules. Another entitled vet. But those voices, sharp as they were quickly buried beneath a wave of empathy. Thousands of people, veterans, nurses, single parents, caregivers, flooded the feed with messages of support. They knew that feeling. The fatigue, the helplessness, the way it burned to be seen as inconvenient instead of human. One message, though, stood out above all the rest. It came from a stranger in Kentucky, simple and profound. Thank you for standing up without tearing down. You reminded us what quiet courage looks like. David didn't respond to many of the messages, but that one he saved, because that was the heart of it. He and Emily hadn't meant to send a message. They weren't looking to make headlines. All they wanted that night was to make it through, to be allowed their dignity in a moment of need. But by choosing not to back down, by choosing to stay present and steady in the face of disrespect, they gave people a new kind of image of what strength looks like. Not the kind that roars, the kind that endures, that bends but doesn't break, that chooses compassion and calm over conflict. And the words David had spoken, "I'm sorry, sir, but you just made a mistake," echoed far beyond that dim parking lot. Within days, they were everywhere, quietly shared, not shouted, etched on mugs, posted on veterans' forums, hung in break rooms of crowded hospitals. They didn't spark outrage. They sparked reflection. They reminded people that the most profound kind of resistance isn't loud, it's grounded, it's composed. It comes from people who've known pain, who've lived through loss, and who've chosen not to let it harden them. Veterans groups began reposting the video, citing David's restraint as a model of integrity under pressure. Mental health advocates pointed to Emily's moment of courage as a powerful reminder of how vital, and too often invisible, caregivers are in times of crisis. Even some hospitals quietly started reviewing their own protocols, asking what it would look like to fold trauma awareness in deeper respect into frontline training. But the most moving reactions came from everyday people, viewers who saw themselves in the story. Some shared memories of VA delays, of sitting helpless in emergency rooms, watching loved ones brushed aside because their suffering didn't leave visible marks. Others spoke of private moments of strength, spouses who held everything together through mental illness or injury, parents who navigated the silent battles of caregiving with quiet grace. Stories that had never been told aloud, finally given space to breathe. And through it all, what echoed was not just admiration, but recognition. A deep, shared understanding that courage doesn't always come dressed in uniforms or medals. Sometimes it looks like two people refusing to disappear, refusing to be diminished, holding each other up quietly, firmly, and refusing to apologize for needing care or for asking for dignity. Their story wasn't about one confrontation. It was about something much larger, something that rippled outward and reminded people that love, when tested, doesn't shrink. It stands, it holds the line. Many took a quiet moment to thank David and Emily, not just with words, but with the kind of heartfelt sincerity that comes when someone reminds you that integrity, kindness, and simple human decency still have a place in this world. Their story wasn't dramatic in the conventional sense. There were no explosions, no headlines, no grand gestures, just a steady, unwavering presence that gently but firmly brought truth into the light. And now the floor belongs to you. Has there ever been a moment in your life or in the life of someone you care about when a calm, honest truth broke through the noise and changed everything? Have you ever seen someone who served or someone who stood by them, brushed aside, misunderstood, or even mistreated? These stories matter. These voices deserve space. We'd truly like to hear yours. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let this be a place where stories are shared and understood, where listening becomes more than a courtesy. It becomes a bridge between lived experiences. If David's journey stirred something in you, if Emily's quiet strength reminded you of someone you know, we invite you to take that feeling one step further. Consider lending your support, whether through time, awareness, or donation, to the organizations working directly with veteran families, those offering hands-on help to caregivers, those standing beside veterans as they confront the invisible wounds of PTSD, those equipping hospital staff with the compassion and training they need to serve with true understanding. Even a small act of generosity, an article shared, a kind word spoken, a dollar given can ripple outward in ways you might never expect. Thank you sincerely for being here, for choosing to sit with this story until the very end. If it moved you, we hope you'll stay with us for more. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and come along for more stories that ask us all to slow down, listen more deeply, and notice what so many walk past. Because sometimes it's the quietest truths that echo the loudest.